Hi, everyone. Surfing Baseball with Ed Lynch coming to you right after the trade deadline. And so I'm your co-host, Tyler Onstott, and here is the star of the show, Ed Lynch. Ed, trade deadline's come and gone. High level, what are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, some teams did better improving their major league staffs or their major league lineups. But to declare winners and losers in a trade deadline scenario is like declaring winners and losers in a draft. I mean, you really don't know the outcome of these trades or the draft for at least 2 or 3 years. I remember in 1998, well, we were in the hunt for the wild card, and Randy Johnson was going to be a free agent, and Seattle came out and said they're going to trade him. So I was on the phone for 3 or 4 days with their people in their front office, and I basically said, "Tell me who you want. Tell me from our system who you want." And they said, "Well, we want a shortstop that can come in and play every day next year. We want a starting pitcher and go right into our rotation, and then a mid rotation kind of guy that can come in and win games for us." And I said, "Well, look at our system." And they looked and looked, and I was talking to Roger Youngward because it was hard to get a hold of Woody Woodward. But Roger was the guy running all the trades then. And so I said, "Look, tell me who you want." And I remember the trade deadline for some unknown reason was midnight then, on July 31st. And of course, I'm in Wrigley Field. We had a day game that day. So I'm sitting in my office for 7 hours after the game, going over scenarios and everything. And finally, at midnight, Roger calls me and said, "Hey, we made a deal with the Astros." So the next day in the paper, I pick up the paper, and it's Ed Lynch blinks first in poker game for Randy Johnson, and Astros get him for a song. They gave up nothing for him. Well, they gave up Freddie Garcia, who was a multiple-time all-star, top of the rotation kind of guy. Carlos Guillen, all-star, shortstop for many years in Seattle. And John Halama, who won 10 games, maybe more than once for them. So you really can't label a trade as a winner or a loser. Obviously, if you go out and win the World Series because you acquire a player, then obviously it's a winner. You can talk all you want about how good those prospects are, but forever you've got that trophy in your trophy case. So, when in '98 when they acquired Randy Johnson, I think he went 10-0 after the trade deadline in August and September. But then they lost to the Padres in the playoffs. And those three guys, especially two of them, went on to multi-year productive careers with that team. So it's very difficult to, understand the value of these trades until you look back historically. But, just to help your club, I think the Dodgers did a very good job. I think the Padres did a good job. They got Tanner Scott and Brian Hoeing, and now their bullpen, because from here on out, the bullpen's going to tell the tale on who wins and loses in Major League Baseball. Dodgers got Flaherty. I watched him pitch last night. He's a professional. He throws strikes. He's not overwhelming, throwing 150 miles an hour. But he's got 3 pitches he can throw for strikes, and he understands how to pitch. So that was a good acquisition. So I guess the bottom line is it's hard to tell who the winners and losers are until you have some time to look back and see exactly what you gave up. Now, the Padres, they gave up, I'm sure, some Latin players. And the one way to build your system, obviously, is through the draft. And if you finish in last place like the Orioles did year after year after year, you're going to get some pretty good players in the draft. And they did. They cashed in. You got to give them credit for that. But there's also the Latin America equation, the July 1st signings. And nobody, I don't think, has spent as much money or any more money than the Padres did. So you might see they traded a 20-year-old Dominican shortstop, but they might have given the guy several $1 million. You just don't know until you can look a little deeper. And I haven't had a chance to look that deep into it, but there's too many variables in this whole thing, Tyler.
Yeah, and I think about two things. First, so as you're speaking about, hindsight's 2020, basically, I think about in 2004, the Cubs made a four-way deal with, I think, the Twins, Boston, and I can't remember the fourth team that was involved. But basically, the Cubs got Nomar Garciaparra, and that was supposed to be the end-all, be-all, and tickets all of a sudden, were sold out for Cubs games, and then they didn't even make the playoffs after that year, despite the rotation. Injuries were involved, obviously. But I look at that in hindsight, and it's like what could have been, should have been, but it goes back to what you were saying with sometimes trades aren't end-all, be-all either.
That's right. And, again, if you go out and win the World Series, if you make a trade and you go out and you get to the World Series, you have a chance to win, then it's hard to say anything critical about those trades. So, again, I mean, teams, the Dodgers are obviously the team to beat in the West. They're going to win the division. And it's all going to boil down to what starting pitchers they can put out there in the wild card game, the division series, the NLCS. That's the key, because if you're putting relievers in the game, and I point to the Diamondbacks last year, they came home, I think, for Game 3. They just won a game in Texas, and I'm thinking, boy, they're in the driver's seat. They did not have a starting pitcher for Game 3, so it was staff. It was 10-0 by the third inning. So starting pitching, veteran starting pitching, usually is what wins in the postseason, and I think that's why getting someone like Jack Flaherty is a huge acquisition for the Dodgers.
And then we kind of turn the page to the Marlins, and one of my old teammates from Missouri State, he was the only one, I believe it was everybody on the opening day roster was traded except for my old teammate Jake Berger, third baseman for the Marlins. He was the only one left. He's under team control through 2028. I think they're going to flip him in the offseason. He's having a great year, so I think they have held on to him just to see if they could get a couple more prospects out of the deal. But outside that, the Marlins pretty much cleaned house.
Yeah, the best way to determine what a team is hoping to accomplish at the deadline is their attendance. Really, I mean, are they putting a product on the field where people are going to come out and watch them? If you're playing in front of 6,000 people every night, you're probably going to be a seller. I mean, obviously your record, but everybody seems to be in it with the extra wild card. So, I mean, if you're 6 games out of the second wild card and there are 4 teams ahead of you, especially when you never play them, everybody plays everybody. It used to be, if you're in the National League, you're going to be playing National League teams mostly, after the interleague thing they had like halfway through the year. But near the last month or two of the season, you're playing nobody but National League teams. And the chances are you're going to be playing that wild card team in front of you more than one series. So you have a chance to catch up. But now with everybody playing everybody and you're 6 games out with 3 or 4 teams ahead of you, it's a very difficult hill to climb. So if you're looking at teams that obviously the White Sox, the Rockies are going to be sellers, but there's teams that the hardest decision you have to make is, and I think we've talked about this before on the previous podcast, it's very hard to just come out, unless you're the White Sox, Rockies, and say, hey, we're sellers, we're sellers at the deadline, because that's the last thing the players in that dugout want to hear. And it's the last thing the fans want to hear. So it's a very difficult decision. And very rarely will you have a team that's in that mass of players that are 6 games from the second wild card, 5 games, 4 games, to come out and say we're sellers, or come out and say we're buyers. They're just going to see what happens. If there's a deal that makes sense for them, they'll do it. So, the Marlins, you look at their history, it's crazy. How many division titles the Braves will have won since divisional play started? Probably 15, 16, 17 division titles, and they've won 1 World Series. And the Marlins have won 0 division titles, and they've won 2 World Series. And they've rebuilt themselves more than anybody. I remember the team in '97 that won the World Series, and they beat Cleveland. And we played them when I was with the Cubs at GM. We played them in Miami opening day in '98, and they had traded their entire roster in the winter. And, Wayne Huizenga was there. And I remember it was opening day, and it was a big crowd. and they introduced all the players, and then they introduced the owner, who just brought South Florida their first World Series championship, and they booed the hell out of him. It was so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. And I think in his mind, he's thinking, why am I doing this? I just won this town a World Series, and they're booing me something awful, opening day the next year. So, some teams are just not going to generate the revenues to not only maintain their own roster, but to expand their roster at the trade deadline. So, probably 100% money talks and everything else walks.
And kind of going along with that, you talked about, the owner being booed after winning a World Series. I can think of a general manager in Chicago who always got booed no matter what he seemed to do. And I'm talking about Jerry Krause for the Bulls. Obviously he didn't own the team, but, I think about big market, small market teams, but then I also think about that owner GM relationship when it comes to trades. So how much of a factor, let's start with big market versus small market, and then owner GM, kind of what the, if a owner's thinking about, hey, I'm ready to sell the team, he's probably going to open up his pocketbook and say, go win now so I can sell the team for more. But again, I've never been a GM. So,
well, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Usually, if you're trading talent for talent that are getting paid the same amount of money, the owner's really not going to get involved. He's going to trust your judgment. But if you're trading minor leaguers for a rent-a-player, you're going to rent him for 2 months, basically. He's going to be a free agent. You're telling your owner, hey, listen, we just want this guy, to come in and help us for 2 months. And then we'll decide if we're going to offer, I don't even know if this even exists anymore, the matching offer, whatever, to get compensation back. But usually, it all starts with the owner. So if you're going to trade minor league players for a player that's got more than the end of this year on his contract, that owner's going to be involved. I mean, that's really going to be his decision. If you come to him and say, I want to do this, and he says no, then you can't do it, obviously. But if he says yes, I mean, that's his decision based on your expertise. So ownership is always involved. It's their franchise. It's their property, So, the Marlins with Peter Seidler, when he was still alive, God rest his soul, they went for it. They spent more money than I think the whole industry thought that they should have based on their revenue projections. San Diego's a tough market. You've got the Pacific Ocean, Mexico, the desert, and then that 800-pound gorilla. That's what's bordering you, the Los Angeles Dodgers, right above you. So you're on a kind of an island there, but they're drawing like crazy. They're selling out pretty much every night. Fans are excited. So they almost had to make a move, and they made some good moves. But is that the right strategy for them? I don't know, because based on new ownership, I'd have to think they're going to try to cut payroll after this year. But it's very difficult when you have 3 guys making 30+ million. It's hard to move those guys under any circumstances. So, again, you look at the stands, they're selling out every game. The Phillies, they're going to add the Dodgers. They're going to add at the deadline. So, but I think the overriding theme of today's call about deadline is, mark these players' names down. In like 2 years, you might see a couple of guys running around the field for somebody else. Oh, what trade were they in? Oh, they were in the Jack Flaherty trade, or they were in the Tanner Scott trade, or whatever. I mean, the Padres traded. I did a little bit of homework. It looks like they traded about 8 of their top 15 prospects in this latest round, and they probably did something similar to that in 22, or when they made the playoffs. And last year they didn't make the playoffs. So price to be paid for trying to win right now. And I don't know if the Padres, as a team, what their revenue stream is going to be, trading away prospects like they have, and they have a lot of prospects, but they paid a lot of money for those guys. I don't know if that's the right strategy, but again, if they win the World Series, it's all worth it.
And I think back to kind of wrapping up here last few minutes, I think back to 2016 when the Cubs made the trade. They gave up Eloy Jimenez and I think 2 or 3 other prospects to get Aroldis Chapman. And obviously they got the trophy to show for it now. Without Aroldis, I don't think they win that World Series. But, they gave up a lot for that. And so, it paid off at the end. But if Game 7 goes the other way, I mm, yeah, I'll
That
just
rain
leave it
delay
at
might have been the best thing that happened to them in the seventh game.
yeah.
So, but yeah. So hey, I want to talk a little bit about the draft and
Yep.
what players. It's a very, very exciting time for a lot of families and a lot of young players. A friend of mine whose son was just drafted. I'm not going to tell his name, but I will say I had a couple of friends call me. One son's a position player, the other son's a pitcher, and both high school. And they asked me what their son's going to expect, and I said, well, let me tell you something. They are going to be taken care of 10 times better than they would be taken care of if they went to a college in terms of diet, exercise, learning, teaching, the quantity of work. I mean, you go to Division I NCAA school now, you're really not even allowed to play games in the fall. I mean, you're sitting around doing nothing and maybe hitting in the cage or whatever, but you can't match the ability of major league teams to develop players. I mean, I played in the College World Series. I went to a huge D1 program, South Carolina in the 70s. We were ranked number one for weeks on end. We lost a national championship game twice. I know baseball's in colleges is different now. We could play a lot of spring games back then, but we didn't get the instruction and we didn't have the facilities that they have in pro ball now. So, but the advice I gave the pitcher is, the father of the pitcher is, just your son's main concern is to stay healthy. That's his main. Don't overthrow. Don't try to impress people. Try to get people out if you can, and that's good enough for now. And that's always should be good enough, but a lot of times they bring up guys with spin rate and velocity and all that. Stay healthy. Listen to your pitching coaches. Don't overthrow. The position player, I said, hey, you're going to get a call from your son in about 2 days telling you that his thumbs are killing him or he's tired because now you're hitting 7 days a week and you're going out swinging that wood bat 7 days a week. You're getting jammed. You're hitting them off the end. You're doing a lot of work. You're going to be very tired. So the advice I would give the father, the advice to give his son is just, get your rest. Make sure you hydrate yourself, and they'll get all this help there. We didn't have that kind of help when I first signed back in the mid 70s, but just stay with it. It's going to get better. You're going to feel overwhelmed. You're going to be facing a 19-year-old Dominican whose first pitch is at 100 right at your head, and the next one's down on the black, and you're going, I'll never be able to hit these guys. But over time, as you get comfortable, then you start facing pitchers that have an idea and they're around the plate more and you can see what their plan is. And sometimes it's easier to hit off pitchers that have a plan than that guy has no plan, who's just throwing as hard as he can. So I think my advice to both parents is stay the course. Don't get discouraged. Stay healthy. Don't try to do more than you can. There's always going to be players that are better than you. Don't think you're going to go in there as the biggest, strongest, most talented guy because you're not. You're going to run into 19-year-old Dominicans who are bigger, stronger, faster, have better arm strength, more bat speed. But just realize that you were drafted for a reason. Go out and play the game the way it's meant to be played. Don't try not to make mental errors because the guys that are managing you all the way through your minor league career, their goal is to get to the big leagues too. And the way they do that is to win. So if you help a manager win in the minor leagues by not striking out with a man on third and less than 2 outs or moving a runner over here or there, even though they might not teach it, do little things to help yourself win. It's a cerebral game, and so play it that way.
Last question, Ed, too, going off of that. I followed the 86 Mets, obviously. I'm a huge Davey Johnson fan, and I guess I didn't realize that managers, and it kind of resonates with me when you mention a manager's trying to get to the major leagues. If you help him win, he's going to basically think highly of you. So I think about Davey Johnson, Wally Backman helps him win a Pacific Coast League championship or AAA championship, brought him with them. And then I think it was Doc, who he said, I want him on my opening day roster. And I think Frank Cashin at first was like, no, let's keep him. And Davey had a lot of pull in that. So do you see that has that changed with everything going on now in baseball, or do managers still have a lot of say? If they've come up from the minors, they're like, hey, I was with this guy from AA to AAA, and I want to bring him with me.
No, I think that's still true, maybe to a lesser extent. But I always said my relationship with managers was always a negotiation. I never just wrote out a lineup card and sent it down there every day, because the advice I got from Andy McPhail is, hey, when it's time to fire this guy, he's going to say, well, you filled out the lineup card. I didn't. You've got to give him a chance to manage. Now, the game has changed immensely since I was a general manager. I mean, you have the analytic guys are involved a lot more, and sometimes justifiably so. You get a gut feeling, I think this guy's going to be good tonight. Well, he's 0 for 21 off this pitcher. So, I mean, there's certain things there that they can help with. But, in the Dwight Gooden scenario, he came to AAA at the end of the year in A-ball, and they helped Davey win the AAA World Series they had back then. Wally Backman played for him. So he's going to fight for guys like that. And I remember in in 84 in spring training, when Dwight was not going to make the team, that was the message from day one. And then as he eventually made, quality major league hitters look like little leaguers, the tone started to change. And I remember we were talking to Davey during the spring training. I'm saying, this guy's the best pitcher on this staff. He goes, I know, I'm fighting. Frank says, he's got to go to AAA. And as spring went on, you could see that Frank was weakening a little bit. And it came down to, I remember we finally said, hey, man, this guy's got to make the team. And he said, yeah, well, Frank told me, pitch him somewhere that it's a very difficult place to pitch. And if he does well, then you can have him. So I think we went to Fort Lauderdale to play the Yankees. Nobody wanted to pitch in Fort Lauderdale to play against the Yankees in those years. The wind was always blowing out. They always had a really good team. Yeah. And it was a tough place to pitch. Dwight went out there and made them look like little leaguers. And I remember his number was 64 the whole spring. And back then, nobody wanted to wear a high number.
Right.
And I remember the next day, that was like a Sunday day game. We came back. We had an off day Monday, and Tuesday, here comes Dwight running out on the field, number 16. And we all went, hey, congratulations. He made the club. And, the rest is history. Went on to pitch 240 innings or 50 innings. I mean, this is a guy, by the time he was Paul Skeen's age, Dwight had probably pitched over 700 innings in the big leagues, Yeah. So was that too many? Yes, I think so. I think he should have been protected more, but goddamn, it was fun to watch. I mean, setting records every night and as a teenager. So it was amazing. So the bottom line is, for young players right now, stay healthy, listen to your coaches. They got a lot of experience. Take advantage of all the facilities, the food, the video, everything they have, and just it's a process. It's a process that takes a while, but just try to improve yourself daily.
Ed Lynch, as usual, appreciate it. I'm sure I know our listeners are going to appreciate all the advice, and coming from someone like you who played in the MLB, was a scout, GM, obviously. This is awesome. So appreciate it. We will post our next show soon, and Surfing Baseball with Ed Lynch.
Thanks, Tyler.